Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Darlene Tando. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a licensed clinical social worker here in San Diego. And I've been working in private practice since about 2005 and started working with transgender folks probably in 2006. So it's really taken up the large majority of my practice. And now I would say about 95% of my clients are transgender or gender diverse. And I do individual and family therapy. I do trainings and sometimes consultations. I have an awesome team. We're calling ourselves Tando Therapy Team now, and they're amazing. I have currently, I have 4 associates, Tristan, Callista, TR, and Jaime. And then I have 1 licensed clinician, Nikki. And then I have another licensed clinician, Kim, who oversees 3 other associates. Everyone on the team I fully trust, and it's been amazing to have folks who I know are informed and affirming and can fully support referrals that come my way that I can't take on anymore. So really happy to have this team behind me. Sometimes in this talk, I will reference a book. This is a book that I was asked to write. It's part of the Conscious Parents Guide series. And there's Conscious Parents Guide to a lot of different things, like the Conscious Parents Guide to ADHD and executive function, and they asked me to write the gender identity piece. So this was written in 2016. I think it's really helpful for parents who are coming to terms with observing and affirming and accepting their child's gender identity, and can help with especially navigating responses from the outside world. Relatedly, I would say language is ever evolving. I think that some of the language in my book is outdated, considering it was 8 years ago. Language that I use today is different than I used 5 years ago, and it will definitely be different 5 years from now, because I think as a community, there's always language that's being found that better represents someone's experience. And so if I use language that you feel is outdated or inaccurate somehow, I'm always open to feedback, particularly centering the consensus of trans voices. I also want to say that in this talk, I will be referencing parenting a lot, and I don't mean simply biological parents, of course. I use the term to reference anyone who is in the process of raising children, providing them with protection and care, and helping their development. My colleague Johanna Olson-Kennedy is super good at saying parents, caregivers, and guardians. I find that to be a little bit clunky. So I do say parents, but please know that I'm representing anyone in the process of raising a child. I want to say that I cannot see anything except my slides. And I've yet to figure out how to look at chat or that sort of thing. So if you have a question or you need to insert a comment, just go ahead and unmute yourself and say, excuse me, and you'll pop up in the one window I have, and you can ask a question. And then if there's a question that you would like me to address at the end, you can put that in the chat, and Carrie or someone from TFSS will let me know about the question. Okay? Is everything okay so far? Everyone can hear me and see me? I can only see Carrie's window. Okay. Okay, I'll assume everything's good. Stop me if not. Okay, so I want to start by acknowledging the cultural considerations when it comes to parenting, because I, of course, come from, I practice in San Diego, I practice in California. It's a very westernized perspective of parenting. And so always incorporating someone's cultural experience of parenting when it comes to not only just raising their child, but also how they approach a child's gender diversity. So the culture will not only impact how they view gender expression and identity, but also how much free will is given to the child. I think in the westernized perspective, there's a lot of free will given to the child, letting the child lead and all of that is not necessarily in line with some cultural ideas of raising a child. And so I like to be sensitive to that when I work with parents. And I'm also aware of the fact that they will be influenced by their own culture, society, family, and will be differently affected by the input of family members and the role of elders. I think that the westernized perspective tends to come across as if someone is expressing resistance, then the parent then resists that individual, right? And I think that in other cultures, it is not that easy. It is important to listen to and provide respect to the elders. And so if elders are kind of giving a different perspective to raising a gender diverse child, that can be quite difficult for parents. And then I also believe that cultural identities impact how much mental health professionals are sought out and how much credence their advice is given. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about different values in different cultures. I think that, you know, in some cultures, individual good is valued over collectivism and vice versa. And so decision making sometimes will be largely in the hands of parents. And then, like I said, in other cultures, sometimes it can be a little bit more child-led, allowing a child to give more input. This is a really good culturally inclusive resource. It was created by Maya Gonzalez, and she created the gender wheel. I do have this book in my office, and I really love a lot of the concepts she introduces to make a more genderful world. Really kind of, you know, expanding multicultural and indigenous awareness, divesting in opposite and binary thinking, holistic thinking, liberating from systemic oppression. So I think this is a great resource. I also have I will be sharing slides at the end, so these will be included. Unfortunately, they're not clickable, but these are really great resources as far as supporting families of various cultures. And here's one that has a lot of different culture-based resources. One thing I find is that sometimes when parents are struggling, it can be really nice to connect them with another family of the same culture. And many times that family has struggled with, and maybe someone who is farther along in the acceptance journey, that family may have struggled with very similar things, and they can provide a very unique perspective to that family. Okay. I need to stop this for a second. There's something right in the way. Okay. Okay, so this is, 101, and I think many of you do not need this review, but I will give it anyway because I think it's a good clarification. And sometimes this is something that is really important for parents to understand from the very beginning. Gender expression centers on interests, play, way of dress. Some kids express their genders in ways not expected for stereotypical gender. So meaning that this could be something that kids don't express their gender in a way that is in line with their designated gender. And then sometimes for trans kids, once they assert their true or authentic gender, they may still not express their gender in ways that is, stereotypical for that gender. And so gender expression is such a spectrum, and kids express themselves in so many different ways. So it does not define gender identity at all. It is really sort of separate, although in some cases, gender expression can be the first sort of hint or clue that there's something going on with a kid's gender identity. Transgender kids typically express themselves in ways that are not typically associated with their gender designated at birth. And then they start to express having a different identity than what others assumed, and how they categorize themselves, as well as how they would like others to. And so, parents are witness to this very early on as far as how a kid is identifying and categorizing themselves. Before we get to kindergarten and everyone lines up boys and girls, which is, I think, sometimes one of the most profound experiences of categorization. Parents are categorizing their kids with language at home, right? Son, daughter, and kids are starting to realize whether or not they fit with that category. So parents are a lot of times the first witness to and also exposure to that categorization. This is something I like to call informed listening. So sometimes parents will come to me and say, this is something we're noticing. I don't know if it has anything to do with gender identity, or, if it's just my kid expressing themselves. And so we talk a lot about, if you were to be listening and you could kind of put a label on it, is that gender expression? Is that gender identity? If a kid is simply wanting to express themselves in ways that society doesn't necessarily label as their designated gender, that may just be it for now, right? And then if a child is starting to talk about their gender identity, how they would like to be categorized, how they would like to be perceived, then parents know to kind of log that as that is more gender identity. I love this quote. Listen earnestly to anything your children want to tell you, no matter what. If you don't listen eagerly to the little stuff when they are little, they won't tell you the big stuff when they are big, because to them, all of it has always been big stuff. And, I really love this quote. I keep this quote in mind when my oldest son was young and he was super into Minecraft, and he would quiz me on the different armor, which one's stronger, which sword is stronger, that sort of thing. And I would really engage and say, like, oh, I don't know, let me think. I think this one would be strong because, and sometimes it's hard as a parent. You're super busy and you're not super interested in Minecraft. And so really remembering that at each developmental stage, if you get in tune with them, they will share more as they get older. And I think that this is something that, is a big premise of the book too, is that if you can engage presently and consciously with your child, then the parent will be much more in tune with things like, is this gender expression? Is this gender identity? Is my child's gender identity creating some sort of distress, which I will talk about a lot tomorrow. A life is not a paint by numbers. I do think that a lot of times when parents enter into parenting, there is an expectation. There are maybe a set of expectations, and there are a lot of assumptions. And so some parents may kind of think about what could potentially be possible, right? I think that for a long time there is this set of expectations, and I think that even recently there's been more of a awareness, like someone would say, oh, my kid might be gay. How would I respond to that? I think the assumption is still that their kid is going to be straight, but they start to think, what would I do if my kid were gay? And I think some parents would say, well, I'd be just fine with it, or some parents would say, oh, that would be a struggle. But most people are not thinking about, what if my kid is not cisgender? What if my kid has a different gender identity than that which they were assigned? That's really not in the conscious awareness. And so very interesting to come into parenting more as a blank canvas, right? I think I used the term blank slate in my book, which is a little bit different. That's more about the baby being a blank slate, but really a blank canvas for the child to then paint who they are on it, and for the parents to kind of feel like, I can't wait to see who this kid is. I'm going to be curious. I'm going to witness this child's evolving, and I really have no idea how that's going to turn out. That we're a long ways away from that, but hoping to move towards that, right? And so if a child is different than what the parent expected, then the parent then has to shift expectations. Now, whether or not that's easy or hard or traumatic or whatever it is, there's still a shift. So even if a parent responds relatively positively, that shift in expectations can feel to the child like that's a disappointment, or, I'm not who my parents expected me to be. So again, remaining open and curious about who their child is and will become. It's important to expose kids to diverse people and family structures, so that there's an awareness of possibility, which I think can create more uh, identity awareness in someone. It doesn't create an identity; it allows for that identity awareness. Being aware of language, neutralizing language from boys and girls to kids. We live in such a binary society with a lot of binary language. And so parents can start there by not categorizing kids so in such binary labels. I like to think about giving neutral baby shower gifts, regardless of the designated gender, that it doesn't have to be this explosion of pink or explosion of blue, that it could be a very neutral color, and kind of waiting to see how the kid is, or who they are, what they prefer, gender expression wise. So in the book, I talk about how parenting is like walking a tightrope. I think that for parenting, a lot of times it feels like being on a tightrope, but in particular for the gender expansive or gender diverse child. So in this case, it would be balancing the needs of the child while taking care of the parent's own response and own emotions. The parent having to think about their own gut instinct, what they want to do for their kid, what feels right, and then contending with outside influences. Feeling like what is being a good parent when it comes to a gender diverse child, right? If there's confusing input, that you're harming the child if you affirm, or you're harming the child if you don't affirm, it can be very, very confusing for a parent. And then, there's a lot of fear sometimes. We'll talk about that balancing the desire to affirm a child, but also feeling the need to protect based on a little bit of anxiety there. I think that can be a really difficult journey. So what could help on an actual tightrope? I love analogies. I use tons of analogies in my my work with clients and also my trainings. So I like to think about what would help on an actual tightrope. Staying in control of body response to avoid panic mode. So if someone is in panic mode about their kid's gender identity, right, they're not going to be poised to help the child very much. So really working on self-care, managing anxiety, breathing deeply, centering themselves, centering their mind and thought control, minimizing thoughts that tell them catastrophe is close. If you're on the tightrope and you're thinking, I'm going to fall, I'm going to get hurt, your body response will probably decenter you, and you will have a harder time staying on the tightrope. And that happens a lot of times with worst case scenarios, worrying about kids and their outcomes. And so centering themselves, giving encouragement to themselves, like I can handle this. I will stay grounded for my kid, for myself, really can help. And then the balancing pole I like to use as an analogy for outside supports, parent support groups. Obviously TFSS has so many, and these are really, truly amazing tools to help someone stay on this tightrope, and not feeling alone, and knowing what works for others can be really extremely helpful. So of course, parents come into parenting with their own set of expectations. They have been raised and conditioned with ideas about gender expression. They may have sort of a gut response when they see their gender diverse child doing something that is not in line with expectations of their gender. I think that sometimes that gut reaction feels like my kid's breaking some sort of rule. They're breaking a gender rule. And parents who kind of know that isn't true can then say, no, wait, that's not true. But, there's really no rules about gender. My kid can perform gender any way they'd like. But I think that gut response can still be there. And so in my work, I do talk to parents about how they felt when their child was initially pushing the gender boundary, and also normalizing, making parents feel that it was natural and not shaming the parents, avoiding having them shame themselves. It's just like we're always communicating, or at least in my practice, we're always communicating any way you are is okay to the child, and really trying to normalize that for the parents too, that your response is okay, especially your initial response. And then how do we move through that to help you support and affirm your child, and have a response that is the healthiest and least damaging for the child. Um, and then not acting on it. So if there's a lot of emotional turmoil, then that is a place to speak to partners about that, speak to therapists about that, speak to support groups about that, and not speaking to the child about that, because the child doesn't need to know how much the parent is struggling. Societal worries play a big part. I think that parents are worried about being judged, and they're also worried about their child being judged. This photo is a photo of my oldest child. He actually just turned 14 this week, so this was quite a while ago. But he wanted to wear these butterfly wings to Costco, and the wand. He's pretty gender conforming, but of course, in my house, it was just anything goes. And he was pointing out what he wanted for Christmas. He wanted that big Tonka truck. So I do remember before we went, I had a thought, how would I respond to someone if they said something? Now, as a gender therapist, I think I'm pretty equipped, and I probably came up with a few different things pretty easily. But just even the fact that I thought about it, and I thought about how I would respond in a way that modeled for my son that was perfectly fine, and also asserting myself with someone else. It's really interesting to think about a parent who is contending with this every time they go to the grocery store, or they go to a family event, that sort of thing. Are they thinking, how will I explain this? How will I, best represent my kid, and also kind of contend with this feeling of judgment from others? What ends up by happening a lot of times for a male at birth who is expressing themselves femininely, parents will engage in selective expression. So they will say something like, you can wear your sparkly dress at home, but you need to take it off before we go to Costco. That happens a lot. And if you're a parent listening to this who did that, do not judge yourself. It is really natural. I think that it's because, again, we're conditioned to worry about what others think, and we are conditioned to try to avoid judgment. So, of course, there's messages sent to that, right? If a child is saying, is logging that they need to take off their sparkly dress before going to Costco, of course, there's going to be a little bit of an understanding. There's something wrong with this. There's, I need to kind of, monitor myself and filter what I do. I think that there is something that is really inherent in a lot of parenting, as far as warning a child about a specific outcome. I always give this example. If I went to an amusement park with my kids and they wanted to go on the water ride right away, I might say, well, on the water ride, you get wet feet, and then you'd have to walk through the park with wet socks and shoes, and it's super uncomfortable, right? And so this is from life experience, probably because I've done that and it was super uncomfortable. So we want to use our experiences with helping a child make choices that will create the most comfort. The problem is with gender expression is that if there's like sort of a warning about, well, sometimes people don't really like when boys wear sparkly dresses, right? That is not warning about a behavior. Now you could say, well, wearing the dress is a behavior, but no, this is really a representation of someone's authentic gender expression and sometimes gender identity. And so if you can warn about a behavior to avoid something, yes. If you have to warn about the way that your child is, then no, right? And so sometimes parents feel like, well, if I don't warn, I'm sort of throwing my child into the wolves, right? That, they may not be aware that they could get teased for something like that. And so it's a really fine line. I used to give a whole talk on this. And I think a lot of parents get uncomfortable with that. They go, no, I have to warn my kid. But the problem is what happens is when a child goes out into the world, they start looking for someone to be against them, right? Because they've been warned like that. So something like girls don't usually have short hair, so you might get teased, but you can cut it if you want, right? That's the parent attempting to be affirming and also warning. So I think that there's a little bit of a mixed message there, right? So they're affirmed and they're also anxious. Boys don't usually wear skirts, but you can wear it if you'd like. I think that parents are often coming from a good place. Of course, intentions are the best, but the impact is it can instill fear, dread, anxiety. It also may make the child less equipped to deal with the teasing that may come with being gender expansive. So, as much as parents love to be proactive, this is one situation where I say you may need to be a little reactive. You may need to just affirm your kid, build that ego strength. And if they get some pushback, you process that with the kid. You may say, oh, well, that kid doesn't understand that boys can wear skirts. Or, oh, that kid just doesn't understand yet that sometimes girls do have short hair. Now I'm talking about gender diverse gender expression right now. I'm not talking about a gender identity as far as someone who has identified or come out as transgender. Here's another analogy. Okay, you can wear your oxygen to school if you want. Just know not everyone likes people who wear oxygen tanks. And we'll come back to oxygen tanks later. Okay, so helping and coaching parents on responding to comments and questions. Again, this is in regards to someone who is expressing themselves in a way that's not expected. I think it's good to have parents have some responses in their back pocket. That's her style, and I love it. In our house, we believe all colors are for all kids. I know he's rocking that dress, isn't he? So then not only do the parents feel equipped to deal with it, but their child is watching them have that confidence and that affirmation. Okay, so moving from what do we do when it's simply gender expression, maybe coming out later more, but for now, just gender expression, and it becomes more about identity. The child is the teacher. I think that this can go against the parenting basic of teaching, feeling like you're there to teach everything. Cannot teach gender identity. Gender identity is something that just is. And so the kids are the ones in the role of teaching their parents who they are, and they are the expert. So if a child reveals that they have a gender other than their gender designated at birth, what is a normal parental response? What's normal? Mom, what is normal? It's just a setting on the dryer, honey. I love that because I do not think there is a normal parental response. I think there are a lot of different factors that come into play. So are the responses that parents have to finding out they have a transgender kid, are they based on good versus bad parents? No. When parents are affirming, accepting, supportive, and follow their child's lead when it comes to gender, this is usually because they love their child. Yes. Back to this one. When parents are affirming, accepting, supportive, and follow their child's lead when it comes to gender, this is usually because they love their child. When parents are resistant, upset, caught up in their own response, and reject their child's assertion of gender, this is usually because they love their child. So this is not an either or, that if someone is affirming, it means they're loving, good parents. I think that any parent who has a response to this also loves their child and also wants the best for them. And there may be a whole lot of other factors that come into play with their ability to affirm. Most responses are rooted in love, from loving their children and wanting the best for them. Many resistant responses are also rooted in fear. We talked about this a little bit before, which comes from loving something or someone so much The greatest anxiety comes from the fear of losing something or someone we desperately want to keep. So there could be fear of losing the child altogether. There could be fear of losing the child that they knew. Could be fear of the outcome in the future. And so this drives a lot of resistant responses because of that fear underneath that. Parent responses can be intense when they find out or figure out that they have a transgender kid. What happens is a lot of times before the child comes, a lot of times people will ask if there's a preference about the gender of their child. Do you want a boy or a girl, right? There's the binary language. And the parents will say, well, a lot of the times, we don't care. Doesn't matter. As long as the child's healthy, doesn't matter regarding gender. But what happens is when they have the child, then they think they know the gender, right? Because doctors don't hold up babies and say, your baby has a penis, but we need to wait and see what their gender identity is, right? They say it's a boy. So the communication is when the baby is born, the gender is known and the gender will remain static. That is the expectation. So because of that, parents get attached to this gender, right? They think, I know this kid's gender. I am now attached to having the concept of having a son or a daughter. And not many people are thinking maybe my kid will be non-binary, right? They get very attached to this idea. And so when there's a difference there, that attachment to the gender can cause some of that really intense reaction. So again, communicating to parents any way you feel is okay, and then helping them consciously choose responses that best support their kid. If a parent has a really intense response and they may say something hurtful to the child, I encourage them to go back and have a conversation. Or maybe it wasn't even necessarily hurtful, but it was uninformed, right? And then I think as parents go down the path, they think they learn so much and they understand so much more, and they really feel like they're communicating that to their child. But the assumption is there that the kid understands they feel differently now. I think it's important for the parent to go back and say, remember when I said this? I don't feel that way anymore. I understand something different now. So let's talk about, actually in a little bit, I'm going to talk about parental feelings of loss because that's a big part of it. A lot of times when a child is transitioning to their authentic gender or aligning with their authentic gender, the parents are the ones who really have to transition. And so there may be this intense excitement on behalf of the child that they're being affirmed and seen for who they really are, while parents are struggling to adjust. I think that there can be a pretty intense reaction if the child changes their name. There may be cultural implications to the name, family ties to the name. I think that a lot of times parents lovingly and carefully choose the name. I saw one mom say that she felt like she needed a grave for the name, that she could go and cry on the grave of the name. She was very, very attached to the name. So there can be just so many intense responses. Pronouns are difficult too. Pronouns are making the child feel happy and affirmed, and the pronouns may be making the parent feel uncomfortable and unfamiliar. There are so many different factors that influence parental response and level of acceptance. This is not an exhaustive list. There are so many more, but I just named a few. And you can see how these things interplay to create this outcome where how much there's understanding and acceptance. This includes the parent's age, generation, culture, political views, religious views, conditioning in childhood, temperament, resilience, personality, environment, social supports, how attached they are to the child's gender, and expectations related to the child's gender. This then comes into play with the child's age of first expression of gender expansiveness, their age of coming out, or when they revealed their authentic gender, the child's disposition, the nature of the relationship with their parents, temperament, resilience, personality, environment, geographical location. There's so many things that can impact this. And so it's kind of important to look at all these things, especially when a parent is struggling. Now, this is not a very scientific graph, but it's what I call the acceptance spectrum, right? And some parents are on the end of complete resistance, and most parents do not start out at this end, the complete acceptance. That is usually something that parents travel to. And so a parent may start at any point on this spectrum. Thankfully, I have not seen someone move from the complete acceptance, more towards resistance. We see a lot in this work moving from resistance to acceptance. And that is part of our jobs as providers, to not only support the child and affirm the youth, but to help the parents move down the spectrum. Some resistance is natural. Again, what is normal, right? There is some natural resistance at first, but staying too long in that place can harm the youth. Especially if a child is experiencing intense dysphoria, that becomes chronic stress and trauma, having to navigate this world in a way that does not feel authentic. And parents can accidentally traumatize their youth by resisting, delaying, or thwarting transition. Also, I think that the parent's identity, if they're rooted in a religious identity or a cultural identity, this can be a little bit of an identity crisis. They may want to be a supportive parent, but this can cause like a little bit of this battle between these identities, right? And something that the parent really values. So it can cause some cognitive dissonance. I'm not going to read all of this, but I think that co-parenting is kind of like walking on a tightrope with another human being. I would imagine that would be extremely difficult. And so trying to navigate these things with someone who has a different brain than you, and also they have all those different factors. Remember, we talked about the conditioning in childhood and their temperament and all sorts of things can make them have a lot of different ideas about how to respond to their gender diverse child. And so really trying to figure out what is our goal that can help them stay on the tightrope and start moving towards the same end, right? And a lot of times I will say to parents that it's important to pull the other parent towards them rather than push them away if they're having different ideas, because there needs to be some validation for the resistant parent and giving them space to be heard, which then can help them become more affirming or more accepting. It's natural for one parent to be farther along on the journey. One thing that parents can look for is that if one of the parents is trying to control or change their child's gender expression or identity, that will usually pretty clearly result in distress on behalf of the child, and that can be informing for parents. It may not have much of an impact at first, but I think that in working with a parent long term, and trying to explain the impact of this can drive home some of the needs that need to happen. Blended families are even more complicated, right? Because you're not just working with a partner who is motivated to, work with you, but if there is there's divorce or separation or different households, this can be a little bit different, especially if there are different approaches in each home. And so I think observing how the child responds to each approach, and also observing how the relationship is with the parent based on how much policing or how much affirmation is happening, that can be a really good way to know who's kind of more on the right track. And then if there is a non-affirming household, of course, the goal is to get them, to understand and affirm their kid. But it's important to watch, are they damaging their relationship with the child? Are they damaging the child and their self-esteem? If so, there may need to be a little bit more intervention. But this can be really tricky, right? And so sometimes it's my job to talk to the kid about what it feels like to be in different households, different settings where there's different levels of affirmation. If parents feel stuck, how to move forward. This happens quite often, right? So I think a lot of times it kind of depends on, I think, the level of or the age that the child is coming out and transitioning. Younger kids, I feel like well, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but parents feel like they have a little bit more luxury of waiting or not having to act on something immediately. When a child or a youth is going through puberty, there is a lot more intensity on behalf of the youth to have interventions. And if the youth has just come out and then needs interventions right away, that's very difficult for parents. And so I've had kids where, we're trying to get the parent to accept and understand. This is years ago. I can picture this where we brought in a parent for the first time. I'd been working with the other parent a little bit more, and the teen just kind of bombarded this parent with what they needed. I think it was testosterone, top surgery, and the parent was like, whoa, like I can't even think about that. They literally couldn't think about those interventions. And so, I've learned over time, like those interventions are not where you start with a parent. Where you start with the parent is helping them understand your dysphoria, because it's very important for parents to understand what the youth is experiencing, what the youth is feeling. And when they can start to do that, it makes more sense about what interventions need to happen. I had one father who I felt like was very affirming, was a great advocate for his kid. I think his kid came out around 13 or 14, and dad was on board with pronouns, a great advocate at the school, fighting for bathroom use, that sort of thing. And the kid was very happy and grateful for that, and also desperate to start testosterone. And so whenever we would talk about testosterone, the dad would say, when you're 18, if you still feel the need for testosterone, you can do that. I'm not comfortable with giving consent for testosterone before you're 18. And so this kid was, patient and articulate. And in sessions, we would talk about their experience of dysphoria, right? And so talking about, he would say, I don't raise my hand in class anymore because I don't like the way my voice sounds. And of course, the dad is like, you don't raise your hand in class? Like, you're brilliant. What? Or I don't look in the mirror anymore when I walk by it. I covered up the mirror in my room, or I never ever look at my reflection when I walk by a window. All of these things are driving home the lived experience of gender dysphoria. And so there was one session where the dad looked at him and said, You know, if I had a little vial of testosterone in my pocket right now, I would give it to you, because it was like he really started to understand what it was like and why the kid needed the testosterone to address the gender dysphoria and to get some of those much needed changes that would affirm his gender. So, of course, he didn't have any testosterone in his pocket. They went to the doctor and he started testosterone probably around 15. Empathy really comes into play when a parent is trying to understand the gender dysphoria of their child. The goal is for the other to feel felt, connecting to the other just as they are, connecting to emotions just as they are. And I love this quote about empathic attunement. One tries to respond to the individual's perception of reality at that moment, as opposed to one's own or some objective or external view of what is real. The therapist or the parent, provider, etc., takes in and tastes the individual's intentions, feelings, and perceptions, developing a feel of what it is like to be the other person at that moment. So I think that's really important as parents understand gender dysphoria and what it's like to walk in their child's shoes. I think that's extremely important. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through these, but these will all be available on the slides. These are quotes and input from parents. This mom's talking about how she had her own feelings, but also recognizing that her child was going through a lot. And that the outcome for her was having the best relationship with her child that she's ever had. Everything about parenting can feel really personal. And if a parent is very attached to the perceived gender, then rejection of that, either identity or expression, can feel like a personal affront. And so it is important for parents to remember they're separate from their child and that this gender journey is their child's, their witness to it. This is from the book, talking about how if a parent is in this feeling of grief, they're stuck in the past, right? Worry, they're stuck in the future. One of my clients would say that she doesn't want to borrow trouble, meaning when you worry about the future, you're adding to your distress in the now. It can be important to minimize outside influences, connect with the essence of the child every day, the essence of the child who's in front of you, without the concern about gender sometimes, right? There probably is a lot of focus on gender, but sometimes having those joyful genderless moments. And then, of course, as most of us know, gratitude makes it really hard for anxiety and sadness to be present when you're in the mode of gratitude. I'm going to skip this. There's some affirmations for parents from the book. It's also important for parents to understand the role of projection, right? In most intimate relationships, there is an element of projection. We project our own feelings onto our loved ones. So, of course, parents don't usually feel the same way about their child's affirmed gender as the child does. And so it's important that the parent remember that they're having their own experience and the child is having their own, and those can be separate and they can be quite different sometimes. I think that grief is an interesting concept when it comes to this. I know that Darlene Olson-Kennedy will speak more about this later. What I notice is that a lot of times parents anticipate feeling more grief than they actually feel in the process of their child transitioning. So I think there's like this anticipatory grief where they feel like they're about to lose their kid. And when they go through it, they realize I didn't lose my kid. Actually, I kind of have my kid more than I've ever had them. But it can be a lot of anxiety about the anticipation of that loss. Sometimes the loss is, like I said, about name or the loss of this expectation, right, of who they thought this kid was and what they would embody in their life. This was from a parent who said she's a trained gender scholar and, of course, still struggled with her own child's transition. And saying later, like, I almost have a hard time remembering how hard it was. I don't feel the same loss anymore. And yet I had to walk through that feeling of loss to get to where I am. So really kind of having this acceptance of not only the child, but their own personal process. This is from my gender blog, and a parent wrote about anti-loss, and it's that concept of witnessing his child become more in tune with life and more himself, and really feeling like he gained a lot by watching his child transition. One mother who was already savvy to the world of gender transition acknowledged experiencing some pangs of loss, but refused to stay in that space for long. She allowed herself some acknowledgement of feelings and shed some tears, but she described knowing that truly grieving would be wasted grief. Her child was still here. Her energy was best spent enjoying her child's newfound happiness, making sure their needs were met, and staying in forward motion. Okay, this is a great video that I definitely want to make time for. It drives home a lot of the concepts we've been talking about. I'm going to play it and then ask if you can hear it and let me know, because I have my AirPods in. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Oh, could you hear it?
No.
No.
Okay.
What does that mean if you really are the only person in a specific area, and how do you provide care and make sure that they're safe? And then a parent of a trans person read a small little sentence I wrote on a trans youth affirming post and told me, there are more of us, message me. Follow the lead of their kids, which is very antithetical to how we function as a society. So it's very hard to kind of wrap your brain around as a parent at first, because you're like, well, my kid wants ice cream in the morning too, but I'm not going to tell them they can have it, right?
Yeah, I was not down with that in the beginning.
Yeah, because Sean's like, this is crazy.
I was like,
We're
I'm
not just going to follow a
following
kid.
either.
We bumped heads on that,
We
we definitely.
It was a struggle, it was like, are we going to be able to come together for our kid? Like, but also leave room for our own reactions. Like, and that's what I wasn't navigating so well, because I was scared.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fear.
You're going to have emotions that you're going to have to try to figure out how to deal with them, or that you might even feel bad about. You know what I'm saying? There can be a feeling of loss or mourning of the child that you thought you had. And it doesn't mean you don't love the child you have, but it's complicated. It's a very complicated process.
It's okay to ask questions and be in that gray area of grief. Allow yourself that, but also understand that no matter what, you have unconditional love for your child. Forgive yourself for conversations that you might have had, or microexpressions you might have given. Our kids forgive us because they have unconditional love for us, and that our unconditional love for them shows through as well.
It's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be okay not to be, it's okay to be afraid, but of things that maybe we don't understand, we don't know, we're not educated, but we can get educated, we can move forward, and it's gonna be okay.
Too much in society. If there's something that we don't understand, we're so dismissive and want to immediately jump to the conclusion of that's wrong because I don't know it. That's not my experience. But that's not reality.
With support and the clear sense of unconditional love, these children will be okay. They will. They're challenging, they're challenging passages. But if we can make it clear through our actions and through the places that we take them, that there's a place for them in this world, that they have a right to be here. They've always been here.
They are not alone. That we are here to help them fight. That their child's feelings are validated. That they matter.
When I was imposing my own, what I thought were gender norms on my child was very withdrawn and unsure of herself, to now, as she's living authentically, she has the confidence and she knows that she's beautiful. And we tell her all the time. And it's a night and day experience. I feel like I have my child back. I have my child at her best.
Fathers should be as affirming as possible to their transgender children, because the perception is that we don't support them in that way, the way mothers do. You've led your life. Your life is now, the balance of your life is supporting your children. If that's your job, they didn't ask to be here. They certainly didn't choose this. Knowing that you have the capacity to make their way easier, make their way easier.
That child knows who they are. So listen to them.
I think that a lot of kids are underestimated. And they are as much as our teachers as they are.
We want to help other families see that we're here, that we're available. People can reach us if they need to see what it looks like to have a family go through this process and make it out. I think it's invaluable to have this council present and available for so many people so that they can just see that there is a light, there's a path, that, the path may vary depending on where you live and what your family situation is. But I think all of us on the council have varied stories, and somewhere in there is yours.
Okay, so like I said, that video really encompasses a lot of the points I was talking about, and I absolutely love it. I only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to move through this as quickly as I can for the interpreters. But again, these slides will be available. So sometimes, especially during puberty, there can be this immediate awakening of self or gender identity, and that can create a very urgent need for interventions. And parents are left feeling kind of like, this is so sudden. I don't know if this is real. It can be really scary. There was a non-affirming parent who coined the term rapid onset gender dysphoria. As Dr. Joe says, that's not a thing. But it feels like that sometimes, I think, to parents when there's this very urgent and very drastic to them understanding of self. I think that there's a lot of process that happens for the youth before coming out. And they have already gone through a whole process of understanding self. And then coming out to parents and needing those interventions can feel really overwhelming to parents. So it really is different for folks when their kids come out at different ages. A lot of times it feels like the train has left the station. I feel like that's true a lot for young kids too. that when they know what they want and they want to, have a new name or have new pronouns, and parents are kind of like, okay, but the kid is so excited and so insistent, a lot of times parents are left running for getting on board. Okay, so once parents are over the hurdle of acceptance, now what? A lot of times there's this feeling of this big decision that the kid is now in charge of making. And I'm going to talk about this in my transition as an intervention talk. So I'm not going to talk about it a lot today, but it is difficult for parents because they also feel poised to make decisions for their kid, and that can feel very overwhelming. So I try to help parents see that because their child is not deciding about their gender identity, they don't necessarily need to make big decisions about their gender expression or their presentation, but it may be a natural next step, a way to be affirmed or assert their gender identity in society. And also it may be a compassionate intervention, right? To provide interventions that will be affirming. Lots of different interventions. They do not all include medical interventions. Listening and affirming, pushing past fear, sometimes for the kid too. Working with a gender affirmative therapist, sometimes social transition, and sometimes medical transition. Lots of different interventions. There's a really scary part to parents feeling like they need to affirm their kid, because there's a really big fear of their child changing their mind. I think that statistics that we have currently are scary, but also inaccurate. New studies that are coming out are showing that the vast majority of youth who transition remain in their asserted gender. What we do know is that best practices and for the best outcomes for the majority of transgender youth is to affirm. And if there was a winding pathway where the child feels like they need to do something differently, then the affirming parent would be next to them on that path and going where they need to go. Not going to read this. This is from the book, This Is How It Always Is, talking about how there's no guarantees and no one ever has all of the information they need. They just use what they have at the time and make their best judgment. And that is scary sometimes. A lot of times parents can see moments when they are affirming the impact it has on their child. And that can be really affirming for the parents to go, I think I'm on the right track because I'm seeing this really good response and this happiness in my child. Sometimes it's hard for outside influences. To deal with outside influences. Many people may be sharing their opinions. And sometimes I'm going to skip this slide. You can read that later, but I'm going to talk about this analogy because I think it's really important that sometimes when parents have moved through the process of resistance to acceptance, and then they are trying to help a family member or a loved one understand, and that loved one is resisting, I think sometimes they can forget what it was like in the beginning to try to contend with this information. So this is the cold lake analogy, where if you go camping near this lake and you decide you really want to go swimming in this lake, and you wake up early one morning and you start wading in, and it is so cold, you can tell it's melted snow. Inch by inch you go in, and it's kind of torture, and it's really hard, particularly around your stomach and then up to your neck, and it's really, really cold. And then you tread water for about 10 minutes and your body acclimates, and the water actually starts to feel a little warm. And then a family member wakes up and comes out there and goes, "What are you doing? This lake is freezing." The person sort of has two options, right? One is to say, yes, it is. It was so hard getting in. I went in inch by inch. It was particularly hard around my stomach. And then once I got up to my neck, but once I've been treading water now for about 10 minutes, it actually feels warm. The other option is to say, what do you mean it's cold? This isn't cold, it's actually warm. And so then the family member feels like maybe their judgment is off, right? Because they don't trust that. So it is really important for that validation of how scary it can feel, or that resistance is natural, because for that loved one, it could be fear too, fear and anxiety of losing something. Here's some answers for responding to inappropriate questions. Coping and self-care for parents. I'm going to just kind of zip through these because we're out of time. There is the concept of sometimes parents are so gung-ho to affirm their kids that they're ready to affirm before the kid is. And so that can be an interesting experience, right? Aiden and I did a talk at a conference years ago called Ready, Set, O, because sometimes the kids need more time, would like to start hormones and adjust before coming out to everyone else. Sometimes parents can look through cisgender lenses and prescribe ways to behave or ways to look in order to be affirmed. And that can be a little difficult for the kid and the parent, because I feel like they're trying to help. But what that can do is it can end up poking the dysphoria monster, right? If the teen is feeling like they're not performing their gender the right way. And so may actually increase their dysphoria. It's hard for parents not to know what's coming and what's going to happen in the future. Sometimes part of my job is helping parents sit with that ambiguity. And I'll leave you with this quote: "Parenthood is about raising and celebrating the child you have, not the child you thought you'd have. It's about understanding your child as exactly the person they are supposed to be. And if you're lucky, they might be the teacher who turns you into the person you're supposed to be." Okay, thank you. That is all for the parent process.